Hi, this is Deb Disney, and this is the Service Learning Final Project for the doctoral class EDD740 at Allen College. So I had several objectives, and each item is twofold. The first part is to talk about some aspect of service learning that might be useful to future faculty members at Methodist College. And the second part of each bullet, I will describe aspects of my particular service learning project for my grade, for my instructor, Dr. Barnes. So, more specifically, the objectives are these. First, I'd like to describe how service learning differs from other forms of experiential learning, and then talk specifically about what my service learning project was. Then we'll move into describing the importance of cultural competence as it pertains to service learning. And I'll reflect on how cultural competence pertained to my specific project. Also, we'll talk about how to develop outcomes and competencies for a service learning project. And I'll talk about the ones that I developed for my project. And we'll also talk about interprofessionalism as it pertains to service learning. And I'll describe what I learned as a result of creating an interprofessional service learning activity. And then finally, I'll also address how I learned as a result of this process and what I'll do at Methodist College as a result of this activity. So first, let's talk about what is service learning and how is it different from other forms of experiential learning. One of the research articles that I found, called Innovative Practices in Service Learning and Curricular Engagement, the authors Bringle and Hatcher, they defined service learning this way, that it's a course-based, credit-bearing educational experience in which students do two things. One, they participate in some organized service activity that is meeting an identified community need, but that also they reflect on that service activity and reflect on it in such a way as to gain further understanding of the course content, a broader appreciation of the discipline, and an enhanced sense of personal values and civic responsibility. So there are three kinds of experiential learning: volunteerism, internships, and service learning. So how does service learning differ from other forms of experiential learning? Well, I think of it as a continuum. So on one extreme, you've got volunteerism, which is fairly one-sided. It's focused mostly on providing a service. And think of the other extreme on that continuum being internships, again fairly one-sided, with a focus on learning. Where service learning is that balance in the middle between those two extremes. So there's learning that happens, perhaps it's technical or professional development. There is service that happens, but what is unique to service learning is that there's a reciprocal learning. Not only is the student learning, but also perhaps the instructors are learning, and the people who are receiving the service are learning. Also unique to service learning is a reflection piece, that at least the students will reflect on their experience, and ideally the instructor also reflects on the experience, and the people who received the service have an opportunity to reflect on the experience, with the ultimate difference being that a service learning activity can create a long-term social change. And this information came from a really wonderful document that I would suggest for anybody who is considering incorporating service learning into a course. This document is called Engaged Faculty Institute Curriculum, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce these authors' names, but if you would like a PDF version of this document, and it is just filled with wonderful tips and links to other documents and resources, and this is the website to get that PDF. So additionally, these authors in this document said that students learn about the context in which the service is provided, thus developing a connection between the service, their academic coursework, and their roles as citizens. And so ultimately they do become, or are encouraged to become, more culturally competent, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my service learning project. It occurred on Sunday afternoon, November 13th, 2016, at a nursing home not too far from here in the west side of Peoria. This nursing home is called Headington Oaks. And I paired up with two of my cohorts, Shelley Riney, who is a nurse, and Lisa Preston, who is a nurse. Shelley was teaching a class called N100, and Lisa is teaching a class called N120, and I'm the counselor at Methodist College. All three of us are taking this particular course at Allen College, and because I don't have a class of my own this semester, they allowed me to piggyback on with them. And so we took around 30 students from their two classes as well as a couple of other classes, and we did 6 activities. So the activity I was responsible for was the 6th one, therapy dogs. And Shelley and Lisa and another instructor that was present that day chaperoned the students with the other 5 activities. I'm not going to go into detail about the other 5 activities. I wasn't present for those. I just know that they were happening at the same time. So in my role as the counselor at Methodist College, every semester, the week of final exams, I have a group of about 12 therapy dogs that I have a relationship with, the dogs and their handlers, and bring them on campus. And 4 of them were able to come with us to the nursing home that day. So there was Anne and Wrigley, Mark and Ethel, Mike and Murphy, and then Barb is not pictured here, but this is her little black dog. You can hardly see him, with a couple of the students, her dog Sam. And this student is also holding a warm blanket because some of the students distributed warm blankets to the residents. And we spent a couple of hours at this massive nursing home. We gathered for about 30 minutes prior to the activity and did some pre-work, and then we had the 2-hour activity, and then we gathered for about 30 minutes of reflection time afterwards. And then after the students all cleared out, then Lisa and Shelley and I stayed for probably another half hour and did a reflection ourselves. And some of the handlers stayed during the student reflection period and were just wonderful in helping the students to understand what happened from their perspective as well. So another part of service learning is developing cultural competence. And so what is cultural competence? There's an article called Towards a Culturally Competent System of Care. The authors Cross, Bazran, Dennis, and Isaacs, and they talk about cultural competence as being a developmental process that evolves over an extended period of time. And not only do we as individuals develop cultural competence, but also organizations develop cultural competence. And that development includes increasing our levels of awareness and knowledge and skills. And this happens along a cultural competence continuum with 6 levels, starting from destructiveness to incapacity, blindness, pre-competence, competence, and proficiency. And those are fairly descriptive, but if you wanted more information about each of those levels of competence, you can go to this resource that I have here at the bottom of the screen. So I observed cultural competence development within my project. It started before November 13th. I think it was the evening of November 3rd or November 4th. Can't remember. I went to Shelley's class. I had created a 60-minute presentation covering 3 chapters in their textbook. The chapter on caring and nursing, a chapter on caring and the elderly, and a chapter on caring and the family. And we talked quite a bit about this concept of caring, and that there is a power differential, particularly when we're visiting elderly in the long-term care facility, to be aware that if they are in a wheelchair and we're standing above them, that can be pretty intimidating. So kneeling down so that we're on eye level and going in as equal human beings rather than we're some experts and they are in some way less than us. We also talked about the cognitive differences that we were likely to encounter. Some of the residents will still be very cognitively sharp all the way, this is a continuum as well, some very sharp all the way to some that are completely not aware of their surroundings. And we talked about life stage development as well, that even if that person who today in front of you seems to not be aware of their environment, to be aware that they have had a long, rich life with a lot of history, that they are a lot more than whatever we are currently seeing in front of us. And we did some reflection papers that night prior to the actual event. And we also talked a little bit about therapy dogs and how not every resident will want to interact with the dogs, that some people are afraid of dogs, some people have allergies to dogs, and that some people that the dogs themselves have some intuition about that, and that we're not to force anything, but kind of let the residents and the dogs be our guides with who wants to interact. Going back to that document that I talked about a few minutes ago called Engaged Faculty Institute Curriculum, you see the reference at the bottom of the screen. Within that document, there was a wonderful chapter on outcomes and competencies for service learning, and there was a checklist. So as you're designing your course, these are some of the things to be aware of. And I won't read them all to you. I encourage you to pause this recording and read those yourself right now, or go back to that document itself if you would like more information. But the outcomes and competencies that I expected for my project, by the end of the service learning experience, I hoped that students would be able to explain the diversity that they saw in the emotional needs of residents and the diversity that they saw in the cognitive levels of residents, that they'd be able to relate their observations regarding how this act of caring in this experience could positively impact that resident's emotional well-being, and to be able to evaluate this experience and how it changed their perception of health promotion and the role of the caregiver. And so how would we measure whether or not we achieved these outcomes and competencies? In that document that I've referred to a few times, they talked about giving an opportunity for all constituents to reflect. So we wanted the staff members at the long-term care facility to be able to give us feedback and tell us. We actually created a questionnaire, and for each of the 6 activities there was a block of 5 questions. So for the therapy dogs, if a staff member who observed students and therapy dogs could complete these 5 questions, it would help us to understand whether or not our competencies were achieved. So questions were the same, these same 5 questions for the 6 activities. For example, did this activity align with the needs of the residents? Did the timing of the event meet their needs? Did they observe professional behavior of the students as the students interacted with the residents? In the opinion of the staff member, would this be a beneficial activity to continue with future students once a semester? And then any other comments that they might have for us. And then the students also were given an assignment to write reflection papers. If I had actually had a class of my own, this is what I would have asked for them to write. A 2 to 3 page paper in APA style with at least 2 references. The purpose being to reflect on their experience with the therapy dogs at Headington Oaks, specifically asking these questions, addressing these questions, and you'll notice that these are tied to the outcomes and competencies that were determined prior to the event that I mentioned a few slides back. So again, I won't read them to you right now, but I encourage you to pause the recording and read these and see how they're tied to the competencies that we mentioned a few minutes ago. And again, I did not have my own class, but if I had, this is the rubric that I would have used for grading the reflection papers. And each of these, I realize now that my PowerPoint renumbered my items, but these 5 categories are tied to those competencies again, as well as having a place to measure whether the student followed APA guidelines. And so interprofessionalism occurs in service learning activities. And according to the World Health Organization, you see the reference at the bottom of the screen, interprofessionalism in education occurs when 2 or more professions learn about, learn from, and learn with each other to enable effective collaboration and improve health outcomes. And then there's a synergy that comes from that, when that collaboration creates meaning that none of the individuals involved could have understood on their own. And I did see this occur in my project because we had 2 or more professionals and 2 or more professions, and we all collaborated. There were nurses, Shelley and Lisa, me the psychotherapist, and students from Methodist College. And then we had at the nursing home an activity director, a front desk staff member, and nurses there. And then we also had the dog handlers. And as we collaborated, we all learned and we all created meaning that we could not have done on our own. And we believe, although it's simply anecdotal at this point because we did not measure health outcomes, but we do believe that it improved health outcomes. And one anecdotal piece of information here is that as we were walking down the hall, there was a resident in a wheelchair and her daughter was pushing her, and the daughter said, "Oh, could my mom please pet your dog?" And one of the dog handlers stopped, and the resident petted the dog and started talking to the dog. And the daughter said it was the first time in literally months that that patient had been verbal. So it was really quite incredible. So I think that there were improved health outcomes. Another question was, how did I learn as a result of this process? And throughout this semester, I realized that I was learning throughout this semester. So there was a lot of reading that occurred with some of the references that I've already mentioned in this presentation, a lot of research. I even watched YouTube videos on how to create learning outcomes. And then there was discussion with my cohorts, Lisa and Shelley, as well as weekly posts on Blackboard that we read with all of our cohorts in the class. Then there was the actual experience on the 13th, where we had a pre-event session for about 30 minutes, then observations during the event, and verbal reflections after the event, reading the reflection papers of students, which I did get to read several of those actual papers, even though they were not not a class that I had, but Shelley and Lisa shared with me some reflection papers that they received. And Lisa also had sent an email to our marketing director and to our president. And so there was a post on our college Facebook page, comments that the president made in a college-wide email message, and then creating this presentation. Throughout the semester, I learned as a result of this process. And what will I do at Methodist College as a result of this activity? Well, I hope to offer this recording to the Vice President of Academic Affairs and see whether it could possibly be useful for our faculty members who are just embarking on creating service learning courses. And I would certainly make myself available for any future projects that those faculty members might have. And I'll continue to advocate for connection. Both the service learning project and my final paper, the theme that kept coming through for me was how connection builds compassion and resilience, which is part of my own personal mission, is to help our future healthcare providers to build their own compassion for themselves, for their colleagues, and for their patients, and to build their own resilience so that they can have long, gratifying careers without burning out. And so a key article that I found in my research this semester came from the journal called Academic Medicine, and the article was entitled "The Missing Link: Connection is the Key to Resilience in Medical Education." That connection is the key to promoting resilience, and disconnection is the primary factor that threatens resilience. And this quote, that resilience is the long-term ability to respond to adversity in a healthy and adaptive manner, growing and thriving rather than simply enduring and surviving. And gosh, who doesn't want that? So if you are a faculty member watching this presentation sometime after 2016 when it was created, I end with this slide. Are you interested in creating a service learning activity? And there's a book called Learning Through Serving, authors Kress, Collier, and Rettenauer, and this quote is on page 191 of that book. If you're interested in incorporating service into a course, if you're interested in incorporating service learning into a course that you're teaching, ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. So I wish you the very best, and as I mentioned earlier, I would be very happy to help in any way that I can. Thank you so much.